Welcome to the Arkansas Weather Roundup, all things past, present, and future when it comes to Arkansas weather. We're going to begin the discussion exactly where folks would expect us to. The elephant in the room, or the snow and the ice that's still on the ground. Talk about a major winter storm. Noah Simmons alongside me this afternoon, Joshua Weisel standing by for some in-depth analysis there too. And of course, we'll have trivia today with meteorologist Danny Cassidy. First, Noah, my word, you've had a couple of days to kind of digest things. You're a big snow lover. You wanted this.
Yes.
You didn't think it was going to happen the first several weeks of January, but it happened.
I didn't think so. In fact, actually, when I was moving down in September, I didn't really have any snow boots with me, and my mom told me, she's like, aren't you going to bring snow boots? And I was like, you think Arkansas is going to get 10 inches of snow? And she's like, you never know.
You never know.
And well, look what happened this weekend. He got awfully close in a lot of spots.
I want to pull up the national map. Now, this is an estimate of snowfall totals across the country. I think the first point to be made here is what a whopper of a storm. At one point, we had winter weather warnings stretching from New Mexico all the way up into Boston.
Yep. It was a mammoth of a storm. I mean, often in meteorology, you just don't see a storm of that magnitude, stretching winter alerts from, like you said, New Mexico all the way to the East Coast. And it impacted, well over 100 million people, whether it was ice, because that was the other thing with this system. They had some bad ice, but also the snow and really the bitter cold as well.
The bitter cold that is slowly getting better, only to be returning here in only a matter of days. We'll take a closer look into our neck of the woods. You're going to find that this is an estimated snowfall analysis. It comes from NOAA. It is just an estimate. It's not perfect, and it may look a little bit different. In your backyard, you likely have some measurements that may look similar, but perhaps not exact. I think one thing I take away from this, NOAA, is we all got a lot of something. Kind of just depends on where you're at, dictating what you got.
Right, yeah. Some folks got way more sleet, especially with that second round that moved through late Saturday into Sunday. But overall, I mean, several inches of snow, sleet combined, making for a pretty big storm.
Pretty big storm indeed. That sleet is a big talker in the River Valley right now. I think it's serving as a reminder of just how difficult it is to melt sleet. Road conditions in northwest Arkansas are significantly better than in the River Valley because we had more sleet in the River Valley, and that's one of those impacts that we were tracking out there. Of course, everyone would prefer snow over the other two precip types, but if you have to choose between freezing rain and sleet, you choose sleet, but it's more of a pick your poison. Do you lose power and have bad roads, or do you just have bad roads? And that's what we ended up with.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say sleet. Ideally, you want rain, right? But then if you had to pick one winter, right, you get snow. I guess, yeah, technically we had sleet. We didn't really have to deal with power outages, with a lot of folks had to do with, that heavy freezing rain accumulation, but still making roads a little treacherous, and even, folks were out of school for multiple days.
Most of the week, in fact, a lot of schools out most of the week, despite the fact that precip kind of tapered off Sunday afternoon. That just goes to show you the impacts here. Noah, I want to dive into some local data here. This looks a little bit messy, but this comes from the Weather Service, and this is a good representation of how much snow specifically we got. Again, it's taking in a lot of different reports from various sources, but it certainly is going to give us a pretty clear picture, and this is what goes in the record books. What do you glean from this?
I glean that, most of the heaviest accumulations were pretty much along I-40 and northward, which was to be expected with the original forecast. Something I want to note is that this includes, if I'm not mistaken, snow and sleet totals.
Right, I think so.
And so, you get some pretty, hefty amounts there, especially north of I-40. You had a couple, 12-inch marks. I think most people, though, didn't quite get a foot. In fact, most people were, between, 7 and 10 inches roughly of snow and sleet. A little bit further amounts further south you go. But, it was just a big storm to begin with. And, heavy amounts. This exceeds, your winter storm, or I guess your annual snow, for each winter.
Every average there, yeah. So average northwest Arkansas, 6.5 inches, in the River Valley, just shy of 3 inches per year.
Right.
And we knocked that out of the park with wave 1. Right. Across most of the area.
Right. It is pretty impressive. And even, we had a big winter storm, obviously, this past weekend that we saw. But even, if you guys recall, even the last couple of years, there have been, some big snow. So, if you're a snow lover, you've gotten lucky. The last few years, this weekend was certainly one of those weekends where you had a big one roll through.
So those averages, to your point, is a 30-year average. You made an interesting point earlier. If we were to look at the last 10 years, those numbers may be a little bit higher.
Right. I'm sure they would because, like I just said, last year, I think what you would speak to this, but there was a
Yes.
pretty big storm somewhere. I think it was January,
That's right.
mid-January.
It was January. We actually had two big storms. The biggest one was in January, and just like this one, it far surpassed the annual average. And I think dating back to 2021, there were some pretty significant snows out there. Is it the beginning of a trend, or are we just having some outliers the last several
Right.
years? Much to the liking of a lot of snow lovers. On the other hand, if you don't really love the winter weather, it's
Yeah.
kind of a curse, right?
Right. It is.
I want to dive into the forecast there. From the outset, it was a challenging forecast. Uh, I can certainly look back and think of what would be done differently. What would we have, should have, what did we miss? And in hindsight, while the forecast itself wasn't perfect, I go back to all the data supported high end totals up until the last second as things were falling. And I remember you and I chatted with Molly McCollum from the Weather Channel on Friday. And I asked Molly, I said, Molly, what are the fail points here? We're always looking for why would this forecast be a bust? Why would it not live up to the expectations that we're putting forth? And there were two things that came to mind as we all three discussed that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think dry air was probably a big one, and I think that was probably the main culprit.
Yep.
And we took that into account, right? It's late January. There's just not a lot of moisture to begin with. But in terms of what the models were predicting, I mean, they did not just a bad job. I highlighted this in my Facebook post. They did a horrible job.
Yeah.
In terms of, at least with the first wave, in terms of the moisture, because obviously we take into account the liquid moisture, but when that gets factored into the frozen precipitation, right, you get your snowfall amounts, and they didn't have a good handle, at least with the first wave.
And the second wave, almost as expected, but the sleet really can cut into some snow totals. And we were very clear with that up front. Wherever that high sleet line set up, we were going to see lower snowfall totals. The only thing that I would point out there that was a little bit of a surprise, Saturday night, that sleet line moved into northwest Arkansas, which was much further than expected. And I think, what did we have, 2 or 3 hours of mostly sleet?
Right, we did have a couple hours, and even that sleet line went as far north. I'm pretty sure we had reports in Bella Vista and even Bentonville of at least a brief period of sleet, which, that wasn't expected. We were going to have that warm air aloft get pushed further north, but we didn't think it was going to be as close to that Missouri-Arkansas border.
That's right. You had some good analysis. You mentioned your Facebook post. I want to pull this up, some low-end probabilities. I'd like you to walk through kind of what we're seeing here.
All right, so what we're seeing here, let's look at the upper left image. You can kind of see the text on the upper right there. This is basically just our 10th percentile. So think your low end of snow for the first wave using what we call MBM, and it says an ensemble. So when I say an ensemble, think of a bunch of different model solutions. They're kind of averaged out to almost a mean. But keep in mind, that's a 10th percentile, so that's like a low end. 90% of the other model solutions are showing higher snowfall than what that is, and you kind of see those areas in yellow are 6 to 8 inches. The bottom left is a different ensemble that's still showing the 10th percentile. So most models, if I'd say 90% of them, we're still showing some swath of 6+ inches, setting up either right along the river valley or just north of northwest Arkansas. And technically, and that was just with the first wave that moved through. And technically, with the first wave, we didn't even see snowfall that high.
That's right. And I think, to your point, that's really where things were just off the rails at that point.
Right.
The forecast just it's going to be tough to come back from that. And then you add in the sleet going into the second round. And,
right.
That's interesting. Talk me through this wet bulb freezing line.
Right.
This is some nerdy stuff right here.
This is some nerdy stuff. So this was Saturday evening. This was with the second wave. I have that little line highlighted in pink. That is your wet bulb line. So basically think of the temperature, and I have it kind of written so I don't botch the meaning, but basically the lowest temperature achievable by evaporative cooling. And what that shows you Saturday evening, I think this was at 7 or 8 p.m. Saturday evening when a lot of areas were seeing sleet, basically showing you that temperature aloft, keep in mind we're below freezing, well below freezing Saturday evening, but that temperature aloft, that wet bulb freezing temperature, that's that 0 degrees Celsius or that 32 degree Fahrenheit freezing line. Anything south of that, that's above freezing. So you're seeing some melting aloft. And since you're seeing some melting aloft of that snowflake, then it refreezes as it gets to the surface. That's where you get sleet. And technically, I would argue that pink line was a little bit further north at times based on some of the sleet reports we were getting. But I think that pink line was supposed to be maybe just a little bit further south. But that was basically just, analysis in real time and kind of just a little snapshot that I took when I was kind of going back and seeing how we did on the forecast.
Yeah, so when we talk about how we did on the forecast, look, there's always something to learn, and as you can obviously hear, we've been learning over the last
Right.
several days to make sure we can get better in the future. I go back and forth between how was it a great forecast? No, it wasn't perfect, but I'm going to go with at least a B minus for a couple of reasons. Number one, we were pretty close to the low wind threshold. Now I
Right.
know there's something about the human psyche that if you give them a range of
Yeah.
4 to 8 inches, they only see the 8, right? Like there's a
Right.
range for a reason, and for the most part, we kind of met that bottom threshold.
Mhm.
Number two, even the data that we had up until the minute suggested very different things, and we the data speaks for itself most often. I think if there's anything here, our models and our data still aren't perfect, which
Right.
isn't a surprise. We know that, but
Right.
there's a lot of work to be done.
Right, and yeah, when we're forecasting these things, there's a lot of data, and when I say there was this event had a high ceiling,
Yep.
what I mean by this is that just with the first wave alone, where most areas saw snow, the 90th percentile. So think the high end. Remember, we just showed you the 10th percentile, the low end. The 90th percentile, just with the first wave alone, was 12 to 15 inches of snow. And so we're seeing those numbers, and we're asking ourselves, is this really going to happen?
Yep.
We basically came to the conclusion that that's not going to happen with the first wave.
Sure.
But I mean, this thing had a high ceiling, and we're looking at a bunch of numbers, a bunch of data to try to get the best fit scenario.
But a couple thoughts going into that self-grading score, a B minus. There was a lot of crazy stuff floating around on the internet in
There was.
days leading up to that. People were cherry picking raw model data that whichever one had the highest threshold of 2 feet of snow, and I think unfortunately that really saturated around the area, and folks were gearing up for that. We never guaranteed anyone more than 9 inches, right?
Right.
And in that case, we pretty much verified in Northwest Arkansas with that. The sleet in the dry air certainly mitigated some of that. Here's where I have a lot of pride in our forecast. The entire team here, we saw all that junk. We were responsible, and kudos to Danny, yourself, and Joshua to not just take the bait out there. Instead, we focused on the impacts. And we could have added 10 more inches of snow, and
Right.
the impacts would have been the same.
They would have.
Schools have been closed for most of the week. We had bitter cold, dangerously cold temperatures, pipe bursting cold. All of those impacts verified. And so, while it's super easy to get caught up in the ranges and where did we fall, and the truth is, how did this actually affect us? Exactly like we said it would. And that's
Right.
where I think we really excelled in this forecast.
Right, I would agree. And even, I mean, if you go from Friday night into Sunday, there just weren't that many accidents.
Yeah.
Whether you were in the River Valley or Northwest Arkansas, there were a bit more accidents once more people started getting out Sunday evening and Monday, but that was mainly confined to I-40 where, of course, more sleet fell. But overall this weekend, I think people, really listened to the forecast, and the impacts, again, were the same. You stayed home. That was pretty much your best bet.
Yep, that's exactly right. All right, I want to switch gears here. Let's introduce our trivia question of the week. And that trivia question is this: what is the highest 24-hour snowfall total in Arkansas history? Your options are A, 23 inches, B, 25, C, 27 inches, or D, 29 inches. All 4 of your options there in the 20s. We'll have meteorologist Danny Cassidy break down the answer and the science behind that when we return. We've also got Joshua Weisel standing by for more on this historic ice storm and snowstorm right here when we return. All right, we got Joshua Weisel back in the saddle with us. Joshua, you were, of course, an integral part of this forecast here. As we discussed at the beginning of this show, this is impacting a lot more than just Arkansas and Oklahoma. This was really a huge storm. Kind of what have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was all over the place. I mean, back in DFW, I originally grew up there. I had friends sending me pictures of 3 inches of sleet.
Yeah.
So I got to say, grateful we didn't have 3 to 5 inches of sleet. There were some areas that got hit pretty hard. Mississippi had all that ice.
Yep.
Glad that we didn't get that, but yeah, it was still pretty impactful down here.
Cool. We'll follow up more on the national impact there in just a minute. First, I want to go back to some Arkansas weather history. This week in Arkansas weather history, interestingly enough, as you would imagine, there's a lot of cold and a lot of snow reports. First up, January 25th of 1894, the low temperature fell to 16 below zero in Rogers.
Wow.
Ooh, that's cold. You think it's cold out there today? It was cold back then, too. All right, this is January 25th of 2023, so only about 3 years ago, people in the portions of the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains, our neck of the woods, woke up to more than a foot of snow. It began on the 24th, specifically Mount Magazine had 16 inches of accumulation, 14.5 inches southeast of Kay. That's in Searcy County, with 13 inches in Jasper at Wet Springs, 12.5 inches at Compton, 12 inches in Bruno and Chimes. That is a snowstorm I remember very, very well. I got to tell you, every time we have these big winter storms, I think to myself, how in the world can I get off work and go ride one of these things out at Mount Magazine? Because that to me just seems to be the perfect place to get snowed in. Have you been yet?
I have not.
I have been.
Yeah.
I need to. It'd be cool though. I'm sure they have steep roads going up to Mount
Oh,
Magazine.
yes. Oh, yes.
Take a pair of skis and go down.
You know a little bit about that, don't you?
Just a little bit, but yeah, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, sure would. Okay, let's continue. We'll have Joshua take this one.
All right, so let's see this question here. An Arctic front ended a heat wave. 24-hour high temperature were in the 30s in the north and the 70s and 80s elsewhere. The high temperature in Harrison was 35, while Nashville and Camden reached 84. That was back in 1950. That's a little insane out there.
That is what we call a steep cold front gradient. My word, to have 30s in the north and 80s in South Arkansas.
That is wild.
In late January, too.
Late January at that. I have to wonder, that impactful of a front, were there severe storms with it?
That was my guess.
It's hard to imagine there wouldn't be. Okay, Noah, take this one.
So an Arctic front ended a heat wave.
That's the same one. Take this one.
So this was January 27th, 1902. Through the 30th, a heavy sleet storm hit the state with some of the highest accumulations in the Little Rock area. 6 to 8 inches of mainly sleet fell. The sleet caused traffic delays, severely damaged telegraph and telephone lines, and caused many roofs to collapse. More than $250,000 of damage was done in the Little Rock area alone. That's pretty crazy. In fact, the past winter storm we had, I think the report from the National Weather Service, at least in Tulsa, I know this is a little bit in Oklahoma, but I know Poto, Oklahoma had 5 inches of sleet.
Yes.
And that's pretty, and I'm assuming other areas in Arkansas had pretty similar amounts to that.
And you know, we've been hearing several reports of chicken houses, their roofs collapsing, specifically there in LaFleur County. Heard some of those happening in Logan County as well. A couple of fire departments in central Arkansas also have similar metal frame buildings. Their roofs collapsed as well. The weight of that is quite significant. Interestingly, why I picked this one out is even back in 1902, they were still dealing with utility disruptions. The telegraph went down. You don't hear that a lot anymore. Okay, I'll take this next one. The temperature fell to 6 below zero in Fayetteville, 0 in Little Rock and Mineral Springs, 4 was the temperature in Clarksville, 8 in Pocahontas. That was January 29th of 1872. We pick out a lot of these snowfall and these sleet and these temperature tidbits from Arkansas weather history. I think the key takeaway is while the world has changed a lot, in many ways, a lot of this, climatologically speaking, is very right on cue with what we have been seeing over the last century to 2 centuries.
I was going to say, that looks more like it was Monday morning.
Right, you would have believed that was, yeah, for sure. Okay, we got one more tidbit from Arkansas weather history. 1 to 2 inches of sleet piled up across northern Arkansas at Bella Vista, Dublin and Logan County, Greer's Ferry, Mountain Home, Piggott, Pocahontas, and Rogers. A motorist lost control of a flatbed truck east of Avoca and unfortunately lost his life. That was also back in 2023, just a few years ago on January 30th. That sleet, and this is the really big takeaway here that I think a lot of us really sometimes forget the impact of it. It is very different than snow. It is going to cause some very, very slick roads out there. Unfortunately, that sleet, of course, lingering a little bit longer in the River Valley right now. And so as we continue to see that on the ground, we've really got to be mindful of additional black ice and where those areas that are shady, haven't received a lot of that sunlight, you're going to just need to be taking it carefully over the next several days. All right, let's do this. Joshua, you did some research into this major historic winter storm. While we probably didn't break a lot of records here locally in our impacts, while yes, definitive, could have been much, much worse.
Oh, yeah. No, I was taking a look at some of those videos from Mississippi. I mean, there were situations like cars that got stuck in the ice. There was power outages. I had family in New York tell me they were under a similar winter storm warning from the same system. So we tend to forget kind of the extent of this system because we were impacted here at home. But this was a huge portion of the country. So we have a little bit of a recap of kind of what happened across the United States. And well, there were impacts all the way from Texas up to New York and even parts of, like you said, Boston. So let's take a look.
Days after the snow stopped falling, crews in Kentucky are racing to restore power as temperatures linger below freezing.
Trying to get the lights back on as fast as possible.
Wednesday morning, hundreds of thousands were still in the dark across the South after the weekend's winter wallop. In hard-hit Nashville, Tennessee, tree limbs crusted in ice are still snapping. State troopers are going door to door, checking on people living without power. In Mississippi, with nearly 50 counties severely impacted by the storm, the governor has secured 30 generators from FEMA to send to critical businesses like long-term care facilities. But doctors are warning people not to run generators indoors or gas stoves for heat, with odorless carbon monoxide potentially deadly. The storm has contributed to more than 3 dozen deaths across the country. About an hour northwest of Dallas, Texas, 3 young boys drowned Monday after falling into a frozen pond.
I tried to fight for my kids' life, where I had to watch them struggle and drown, and I couldn't help them.
In New York City, a rare sight, icebreakers freeing up the frozen Hudson River to help commuters. While overnight, an Uber driver already on a ride offered a helping shovel digging a woman's car out of a snowy parking spot. All as the deep freeze is forecast to linger for a few more days. Jared Hill, CBS News, New York.
You know, my takeaway there is, and I honestly think it's so applicable to just about every weather event we have, impactful or not. In some ways, it can be incredibly beautiful while also at the exact same time being life-threatening. I've had this fear that we're going to have local kids drown in ponds. I was leaving my neighborhood yesterday, and as I was leaving, I saw footprints out on that pond. And whoever that was has no clue how lucky they were that they didn't sink through, because the fact is that ice is not thick enough to support human weight, and evidence of that is exactly what happened there.
Right, I was going to say, it might have been thick enough where the footprints were, but if you go 2 feet there, the ice might not be thick enough, and it's just a chance you simply don't want to take.
There's no way of knowing if it's going to support you around here. And often it's not. Like I know you go 200-300 miles north, and maybe those cold snaps are a little colder, lasting a little bit longer. That's unfortunately not the case. You know, we didn't have a lot of power outages here, but that's certainly something that you've shown here is impacting a good majority of the country, Nashville specifically.
Oh yeah, and just seeing like those videos of like the trees that are just completely bent over with the weight of the water. And like we mentioned a little bit ago, people sometimes tend to forget how much the water weighs. So even afterwards, the trees are weakened and they can continue to fall days after the ice storm. So power outages are going to be a problem maybe for at least the next several days.
You know, getting power back onto such a large swath of area is going to take a long time.
Oh yeah.
I hate that. Okay, all right, it's the time you've been waiting for. We've got some trivia. Meteorologist Danny Cassidy is on deck with today's trivia question and answer. We'll send it over to Danny.
Well, we saw quite a bit of snow last week, but it didn't quite line up with the highest amount ever in Arkansas history. So, for those that are wondering, what is the highest 24-hour snowfall total in Arkansas history? Let's go over the options here. Is it A, 23 inches, B, 25 inches, C, 27 inches, or D, 29 inches? So it's somewhere in the 20s. And after giving a little bit of a second to think about it, if you thought B, 25 inches, you would be correct. This was the highest total that was set back on January 21st and 22nd in Corning, which is in Clay County, kind of towards northeast Arkansas. This was over a 2-day stretch, but again, just a 24-hour time period. This was also the same time frame on the morning of January 21st that in Marshall and Searcy County in Arkansas saw a snow depth of 30 inches, which is the highest snow depth to date as well. So this was an historic month, January of 1918, because they saw anywhere from 2 to 3 feet total that month for northern and central Arkansas. And we have some quotes here, or a quote from the National Weather Service in Little Rock, the head meteorologist here, the meteorologist in charge. This would be Harvey Colt, and this is what he had to say during that month, or during that event. So the ground was covered with snow in the greater portion of the state from the 10th of January to the end of the month. The snow being anywhere from 15 to 30 inches deep. That was in Marshall and Searcy County in the northern portions, and even 6 inches deep at times in the southern tier of the counties. No farm work of any consequence could be done because of the snow and the cold weather, except for caring for livestock and some kinds of hauling. The cold is said to have killed most of the peach buds, but the snow cover protected the wheat crop and is said to be in good condition. So interesting just to see kind of over 100 years ago what the notes are. But again, this was an historic month. I don't know if we'll ever see 30 inches deep of snow again, but one can hope, especially a Minnesota guy like myself. But yes, that was the record in 1918, January 21st and 22nd. 25 inches of snow fell there in Corning, Arkansas.
That's pretty remarkable. I would have not, if I didn't have multiple choice answers, I would have assumed it was probably 16 to 18 inches. That is insane amounts of snow.
Right. Yeah. 2 feet. I mean, that's wild.
Danny said one could wish. I got to say, I hope he keeps that wish to himself.
Yeah.
I'm okay with the snow that we got, but 3 feet, that's a lot.
That is a lot indeed. Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to make you aware of one thing here. It is the thick of winter, no question about it. However, storm spotter classes are firing up literally right now. In fact, the first one is in Podo. That's going to be on the 29th, Thursday, 6 p.m. at the Carl Albert State College. Coming to Fayetteville on February 9th, Monday, 6:30 at the Washington County Emergency Operations Center. By March 5th, the Ozark Storm Spotter class will take place at Thursday, 6 p.m. at the Arkansas Tech University Student Services Center. Those are the immediate 3 in our neck of the woods. There's several more additional dates that the Weather Service is going to be scheduling around the area. We'll keep you posted as those become available right here on the Weather Roundup and, of course, over on 5newsonline.com. One question for you. Groundhog Day is in a few days, and while we give that rodent all the grief he deserves, I'm curious, what do you guys think? Do you think we're going to have another winter storm before this year is over with, or are we done?
I think we'll have one more. Was it going to be as prolific as the one we just had? I don't know about that, but I think we get one more.
Yeah, it's like I've been saying, it's always around Valentine's Day that we get kind of that last hurrah from winter. I'm hoping we don't, but I have a feeling we're going to have it.
The pattern certainly seems to support at least one more in the next several weeks. So if you didn't get as much as you'd like, you might have another chance. That may be bad news to you either way.